As much as we would like to sit around and continue to celebrate West Virginia's backyard brawl victory, it's time to move on. Big 12 play is here, and West Virginia travels to Kansas to face the Kansas Jayhawks in the first Big 12 contest of the 2025 season. And we're bringing on a very special guest to preview the game, and we're going to have that conversation right now. What is up, and welcome into this episode of Couz's Corner, your home for top shelf college sports news and analysis surrounding the West Virginia Mountaineers and the Big 12. Coming on the show today is Mr. Kevin Flaherty, who covers the Kansas Jayhawks over at the Kansas City Sports Network and is part of the 365 Sports newsletter team. Kevin, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Going well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So so you cover Kansas over there at KCSN, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We have the Payheed podcast where we talk sort of all things KU, and then actually the Verbal Commitment podcast is sort of a passion project of mine where we take a look at Kansas and Kansas City area prospects, and it's not just the really highly touted guys, the guys going FBS Power Four. We get a chance to shine the light on Division II guys, the guys going to Baker College, and so we've really found a nice niche with that, being able to shine some light on those kids with the coaches, with their parents, and everything. It's been kind of a cool deal.
Awesome. So the Jayhawks are coming off a loss, a rivalry loss, 2 weeks ago to Missouri. Talk a little bit about that game, and if you think there'll be any hangover from that game coming into this one against West
Yeah,
Virginia.
I think it's an interesting case in the way that football games can kind of get away from you sometimes, right? You have the best laid plans. You go out, you've got your script, and hey, this is how we want things to go. And then Missouri winds up having the football on 46 out of 50 plays. And so the next thing you know, you've got a cold offense, you've got a tired defense, and Kansas still had its chances to win. But ultimately, and one of the things that I'm really interested to watch heading into this game is Kansas couldn't get off the field on money downs defensively. When you look at third down, when you
Mm-hmm.
look at even a few fourth downs, and so that allowed Missouri to extend these drives to kind of take the air out of the football. And so I'm interested to see if that's something over the bye week that Kansas was able to find some answers for heading into West Virginia.
Yeah, Kansas. They did not get on the field on third down, but how are they? How's their defense on as far as short yardage situations and red zone situations?
Well, and see, that's one of the things that I think could wind up being an advantage for West Virginia in this game is Kansas didn't tackle super well to start the Fresno State game, but then tightened up. Kansas tackled Wagner pretty well, but you would expect Kansas to tackle Wagner pretty well. But then when you look at the Missouri game, the Missouri running backs ran for 255 yards. 159 of that was after contact. And when
Yeah.
you look at what Ty Edwards was able to do against Pitt, I think 94 of his
Yep.
141 yards were after contact.
Yep.
That's going to be something that they're going to have to be better at because, as you know, I mean, it's so different playing somebody in second and 8 and third and 6 than it is playing against them on third and 2, third and 3. And so the tackling has to get better. Ultimately, I think they feel like some of that will, by virtue of the bye week, of guys getting healthy, guys getting back fresh again. But at the same time, that's been maybe the one. I don't want to say Achilles heel because they're 2-1, but that's been the one thing that you circle and say, okay, is this going to be a season long issue, or is this something that they're going to get corrected really quickly?
Yeah. When it comes to stopping the run as a whole, you mentioned tackling specifically, but just their overall run defense. I'm looking here. It looks like they had a 59.2 grade, so not slightly below average there. So, do you think that's strictly because of the tackling aspect of it, or do you think guys are missing assignments, or what do you expect out of this Kansas run defense?
Yeah, it's mostly the tackling issue. They did have a blown assignment or two that led to really big runs for West Virginia. But generally speaking, maybe the strongest position on this Kansas football team is that group of defensive tackles. They can
Interesting.
go 5 or 6 deep, especially when Gage Keys is healthy, which he hasn't been so far this year. and they do some things to take advantage of that depth. One of the things that they do that not a lot of people do anymore is they'll show bear fronts. They'll have three defensive tackles out there at the same time, and it's really tough to move those guys off the ball. And so they'll go with three defensive tackles, two defensive ends, and then when they get you into some passing situations, they'll show you a lot of different looks. They're really varied in what they do up front, but
Hmm.
they'll play a lot of defensive tackles, a lot of snaps in this game to try and slow down the West Virginia run game.
Yeah. Well, that's concerning to me on that regard because West Virginia is, their weak point right now, in my opinion, is their offensive line. That group is somewhat inexperienced, and they're definitely inexperienced together. Rich Rod bringing in 80 new players, and that entire offensive line has been rebuilt for the most part. So they're getting better. They played better last week. Now the PFF grades didn't necessarily bear it out,
Yeah,
but they obviously ran the ball well. So there had to be something there. And then of course I saw watching the game I saw some they did create some creases and open some holes. Um, so PFF's not the end all be all, right? We can sometimes watch a game and tell how these guys are performing, but they did perform better. But there's still a lot of room for improvement there. So that's a matchup I'm interested to see is West Virginia's offensive line against the defensive line you're talking about for Kansas, uh, especially if they come in a bare front. Because I think after watching the Pitt game, they're probably going to be like focused on stopping that. I would imagine.
yeah, and they'll move defensive ends around and do different things with them too. At one point, they had Leroy Harris, who's kind of their young shining star to be type of guy. At one point, they had him lining up almost in the A gap, and he spied Bo Prabula. And this is a guy that's 6'5", 255, and so you don't usually see guys playing that sort of role. At other times, they'll line him not even in like a wide nine. He'll almost be like a nickel corner. He'll be out so wide over a slot receiver, and then he'll rush the passer from that outside alignment to kind of give him some runway and some space to get out. Miller's been a little bit banged up. He was a second team All Big 12 guy at defensive end last year. And while you would think that that would really hurt them, the emergence of Harris, who's leading this team in sacks, has kind of mitigated that a little bit. And so when you look at that group and look at them coming off the bye, Dean Miller having a chance to get a little bit healthier, I'll be interested to see kind of what they continue to do with that defensive end group because they do move those guys around and do some interesting things with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll see. It'll be interesting to see how Rich Rod responds to that. And he made a comment in his presser that with Kansas having a week off, they've had an extra week to prepare, and he feels like they'll probably do some things that they haven't seen on tape yet. So he's going to have to be
Yeah.
prepared to make in-game adjustments. Same thing, and we can say the same thing about the offensive side of the ball for Kansas too. They're offensively they're probably going to show some things that Zach Alley and that West Virginia defense hasn't seen yet. Whereas West Virginia probably had to put a lot of their stuff on tape last week, especially offensively. Um, but sticking to the Kansas defense for a minute, there's a very familiar name to us West Virginia fans on that
Yeah.
side of the ball. A guy named Trey Lathan, and he is having an absolutely excellent year. The last I checked, what can you tell us about his game and how he's playing this year so far?
Yeah, he's been terrific, and I think one of the I don't want to say surprises, but one of sort of the pleasant developments has been that he's become one of the leaders of that defense. I mean, Trey is a guy that I think came in, and when we talked to him in the spring, he's like a little bit more quiet guy, and not necessarily,
Hmm.
the coaches would talk about we got to find somebody in that linebacker room that's going to speak up and be a leader, but this whole age of transfer portal football, you bring in some new guys they aren't necessary. It's not like they've been in the room for a few years where they've been able to build up that credit to be a leader. But Trey Lathan's been really good, not just you know, hey, this is a guy that's getting tackles for loss. He's making a lot of stops. He's where he should be. He's been good at getting other guys lined up right. He's been good at communicating, and he has been maybe even you could call him the heart of that defense in terms of the way that he's played. He made a couple really big plays. Kansas under Lance Leipold has really struggled against quarterbacks who can run. You saw that a year ago with Garrett Green when Kansas played West Virginia. there were a couple times it looked like maybe Bo Prabula was going to get out of the gate, and we all know what a good running quarterback he is in Missouri. And Trey Lathan closed that space in a hurry, and so he's been a tremendous upgrade for them. Not just as a player, but as an athlete, lending a lot of explosion to that second level, and then as a leader as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking at his PFF grades right now, and he's grading out at a 76.8 so far in the first 3 games overall. His lowest grade is in the pass rush was 62.7, and that's still above average or right at average. So he's having a really solid year so far. 5 pressures, 3 hits on the quarterback, a sack, a hurry, 21 tackles, solo tackles, 6 assisted tackles. Uh, yeah, he's having a heck of a year so far.
He is, and he's somebody that there are guys on this defense that have struggled with tackling, like we've talked about,
Yep.
and you kind of hope that there's a teammate right there, right,
Yeah.
where it's like, hey, don't make this guy make a tackle by himself. And Trey Lathan's been one of those guys that has been pretty reliable in
Uh-huh.
terms of, hey, he's going to square somebody up and he's going to get him on the turf.
Yeah. Yeah. The West Virginia's linebackers have played well, but the one area they have struggled some in is they have missed a lot of tackles.
Yeah,
Um, and that doesn't seem to be a problem for Trey right now. He's doing pretty well in that regard. So we obviously hated to see him leave. We wanted to, I think I told you before the show, West Virginia fans wanted to keep him.
yep,
Uh, he really wanted to keep he and Josiah Trotter both, but for whatever reason they decided it was best to move on. But I'm not one of these. Even though I'm a fan, I'm not one of these fans that wishes him ill will or anything. He left on good terms and wanted to change, I guess. So I hope he doesn't play well Saturday, but uh, but I hope he has a good year. Trey seems like a fine young man. So, and you're right, he always did seem like the quiet type. Even in press conferences and things like that, he was never super, uh, outgoing, or you could tell he didn't. It wasn't really his comfort zone to be talking in a public setting like that. But uh, so it's a cool story to hear that. What about that secondary for Kansas? What's it looking like this year? I know last year they had a really good secondary. Uh, did they lose a lot of those guys, or what are we looking at?
yeah, they did, and so this is a really young group, and a group that I think they feel like can maybe be similar to the group they had a year ago on down the line. You've got
Gotcha.
two second-year corners that are out there starting right now, and Jalen Todd, who is a true freshman and played a bunch last year as KU's kind of number 3 corner behind Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson. And then Austin Alexander, who redshirted last year as a freshman, and now he's out there starting. They did bring back DJ Graham, or bring in DJ Graham, who was a cornerback at Oklahoma, transferred to Utah State, and now he's back at the Power Four level at Kansas, and he's in that group as well. And there are a couple program guys in there who have been around a lot, like Mason Ellis, that are starting to get more and more time. Mason's a terrific story in that he was a really good football player in a small town called Mulvane, Kansas, and blew out his knee, if I remember right, and so was kind of hurt heading into that camp circuit his senior year. People weren't really taking chances on him. Goes out to multiple local camps, including KU's, and runs in that 4.4 range. And
Wow.
so you're like, man, this is a 6'2" guy running 4.4, and KU winds up, extending the scholarship offer, and he's starting to get out there. And he's been kind of a nickel guy and had a part in a forced fumble against Missouri. And so he's starting to play a little bit better. Taylor Davis is a guy that played some last year as a redshirt freshman, is now a redshirt sophomore, and is getting more and more time. And so you're starting to see guys who have maybe been in the program a few years get their shots, and they're doing some good things with it. And then Lyric Rawls, who actually started at Oklahoma State, transferred over to KU, and he's been a key leader in that secondary too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at some pretty good coverage grades there. He has a Rawls is 70.1, and
Yeah.
Jalen Todd is 70.9. Mason Ellis 71.6. Of course, you get down there to the bottom, you've got Taylor Davis at 47.3, which is not good. But
Yeah, Taylor Davis, he's kind of, I describe him as a fireman, right?
this was
Like,
the last game, by the way, not overall.
yeah,
Let
yeah,
me make
sure.
that
Yeah.
clear.
Taylor's a guy that there are a lot of times that he puts out fires before they happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so stuff like that isn't going to show up on his grade where,
Right.
hey, a safety breaks open on a corner or a wide receiver breaks open on a corner route or something, and he gets it over the top so the quarterback doesn't throw the route or whatever.
Yep.
And so a lot of the stuff that he does, I feel like goes unseen sort of by the stat sheet, by the grades and things like
Right.
that.
Makes sense. Yep. Makes sense. Yeah, and the P, like I always preface it when I tell, when I talk about PFF grades. It's a good barometer, but it's not the end all
Sure.
be all, right? They're still the eye test. They're still their statistics, and then, of course, they get graded by their coaches and how they're running the scheme and the assignments, which is even the most important grade. But at least it gives us something to look at and say, okay, directionally, how's this guy playing? Um, we're going to switch sides of the ball in just a minute, but before we do, I've got to take a quick break and do a quick ad read here. So, uh, but we'll be back in a couple minutes. Both the NFL and college football seasons are in full swing, and every touchdown brings you closer to a payout with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Whether you want to bet on NFL games, whether you want to bet on the upcoming West Virginia game, or any other sporting event you want to bet on, you can do it right now at DraftKings Sportsbook. And for new customers, this one's for you. Bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, grab over $200 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Your season starts now. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code Couz, that's code COUZ, to get $300 in bonus bets instantly when you place your first bet of $5 or more. Plus, over $200 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Do you have a gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY, 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. NFL Sunday Ticket offer for new subscribers only and auto renews until canceled. Digital games and commercial use excluded. Restrictions apply. Additional NFL Sunday Ticket terms at youtube.com/go/NFL Sunday Ticket/terms. Limited time offer. All right, thank you for letting me pay the bills there. And let's go ahead and dive in, Kevin, to flip sides of the ball here real quick. What we all know about Jalon Daniels, right? And now last year, Jalon Daniels was kind of struggling a little bit when Kansas came to Morgantown for that game last year. So what do you think has been the difference? Because he's playing much better this year. What do you think has been the difference in him getting his game back on track?
I think there are a few things. I think the biggest thing is just last year, because he only played 3 games the previous year, and because it was one of those sort of fluky injuries where it's a back injury, right? And all those of us who have had any sort of back injury can tell you, you can go to sleep feeling a little bit better and wake up and it hurts even more in the morning. And so their biggest goal, I think, was to get him into last year healthy. And the good part is that part was accomplished. You know, he was healthy all through last year. He played the whole season. The bad part is he didn't get the reps during the offseason that you normally would get. You know, they kind of, for lack of a better way to phrase it, they kind of put him in bubble wrap, right, to make sure that he didn't re-aggravate or whatever. And so even from the start of the year, you go back and watch him against like Lindenwood, and the timing just seemed off. You know, he seemed rusty. He seemed like a guy that hadn't played a lot of football. And I think you saw over the course of last year, he got a little bit better and better as the year went on. And actually, over the last 7 or so games last year, he started to look a lot more like the quote unquote old Jalon Daniels. I think the other thing, too, is a year ago, Kansas brought in Jeff Grimes as offensive coordinator, who was at KU for a year and now is
Right.
at Wisconsin. And I think it was kind of one of those weird marriages, right? Like, I'm not saying that Jeff Grimes is a bad offensive coordinator. I'm not saying Jalon Daniels is a bad quarterback. I'm saying when you look at Jalon Daniels' strengths and the things that he does well, and you look at the things that Jeff Grimes calls well and the things that he builds well from an offensive standpoint, there's not necessarily a ton of overlap there. And so I think it was kind of a little bit of a weird marriage where maybe Jalon was asked to do some things out of his comfort zone. I also think Jeff Grimes adjusted over the course of the season. KU actually wound up leading the Big 12 in yards per play last year offensively. And a lot of it, they were running different stuff in the final few games than they were early in the season. And so credit to Grimes for making that adjustment. But the flip side of it is that a lot of the things that Jalon Daniels does really well, they weren't necessarily doing it as much of. And so enter this year, Jeff Grimes goes to Wisconsin. You have Jim Zabrowski, who's been Jalen's quarterback coach all the way through, promoted to offensive coordinator. And I think there's so much more familiarity there, not just with Jalen as a player, but Jalen as a person.
Hmm.
And so I think Kansas is playing a lot more to Jalen's strengths. The confidence is back, and so I think you're starting to see the Jalen Daniels that was the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year guy from a couple of years ago versus what we saw last year.
Yeah, yeah, he's definitely dangerous. I would much rather prefer him be the Jalen Daniels of last year. But anyway,
Yeah.
because he's, I mean, that guy, I mean, he's just so skilled at the way he's able to throw on the run uh, with accuracy is remarkable. But we all know Devin Neal. By the way, for those who are listening, let me remind you, I'm talking with Kevin Flaherty from Kansas City Sports Network. You can find him on X at K Flaherty, Flaherty, KCSN. Uh, on X, some call it Twitter. You can also find him at the Verbal Commitment Pod or the Pay Heat Pod over on KCSN, and he's also a contributor at the 365 Sports newsletter, along with myself and some others. And you can subscribe to that by going to 365sports.video. You can get all your Big 12 content there in one place, and find out about all of the Big 12 teams. But uh, they had Devin Neal a year ago at Kansas, right? He's
Yeah.
obviously gone now, but they still have Daniel Highshaw, right? But I've looking at the numbers, it looks like they haven't really been able to get on track running the football like they probably have hoped. What do you think's been the cause of that?
Yeah, the timing's been a little bit off. When you run the ball offensively, there's so many things that have to go right to have a successful play, right? You miss one block, you can blow everything up. If
Hmm.
your running back doesn't quite hit the right angle, it can blow things up. And I thought really early on against like Fresno State that Highshaw was maybe pressing a little bit. Hey, this is a guy that waited his turn behind Devin Neal, who's the school's all-time leading rusher, and now all of a sudden it's his. Hey, you have the chance to be the All Big 12 back, to be the 1,000-yard back, all these different things. And I thought that first game maybe he didn't quite look like himself 100%. He looked a lot better against Wagner, and then to be quite frank with you, KU just got blown up front against Missouri's defensive line. That was maybe the best defensive line that KU's going to face all year, and
Yeah.
they really struggled to run the ball. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting was you remember back in 2022 when KU came into Morgantown and snuck out with that overtime win.
Oh
KU
yeah.
had hid some stuff back before that game and came out and ran all this crazy option stuff with tons of motion that they hadn't really shown any of before. I thought they were going to show some of that against Missouri because they had been able to beat Fresno State fairly easily. Didn't necessarily have to show their whole hand there. Obviously, then you get Wagner. You can be pretty vanilla against Wagner. I thought they were going to basically look at it and say, we probably aren't going to run the ball on this Missouri front, at least not traditionally. Let's get them leaning left and go right, and use some of that option, that misdirection, and things like that. I wonder if there was maybe a little bit more plan to do that, but when the game just sort of got away from them in terms of the play count, where all of a sudden you're looking
Hmm.
at it and you're saying, we've had 4 of the last 50 plays, Missouri's had 46, that, a lot of your best laid plans kind of go out the window at that point, and you stop. You start going to, okay, what can we run now that we know is going to be really effective? And so I do wonder if maybe KU will have a little bit of that in store for West Virginia.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see too, because of Zombrowski. Did I say his name right? Zombrowski.
Zabrowski,
Zabrowski.
yeah,
Zabrowski obviously came up or learned under Andy Kotelnicki, right? At
yeah,
least, so I'm sure he's got some of those same play calls in his back pocket. I would imagine.
Well,
I
and
definitely
they brought back the tight ends coach, Matt
okay.
Lubick, who was a staffer on like that 2022 team and played a part in all that quarterback run game,
Okay.
option stuff. And he was at Nevada and then came back too. And so they brought back a guy who's got kind of that option quarterback run game background too. So they brought in somebody to join with Zabrowski, who has a background in that as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that gave West Virginia. Now, obviously, it's a different West Virginia team, different defensive coordinator, different players. But I was at that game, and West Virginia's the entire game. They had no idea what was coming. They were so caught off guard.
Yeah,
They were the entire game. They were they were confused. Um, my guess is no one, after listening to Zach Alley press conferences and seeing how he operates for at least 3 games now, he will probably be watching film from that far back to
yeah.
get an idea. He that guy, I've never seen anybody as prepared. I mean, he leaves no stone. I'm not saying he's perfect by any means, but he doesn't leave a stone unturned typically when it comes to preparation. But it's still concerning because I have never seen that guy. Remember, they were coming out with stuff I'd never seen before. Not sure where they come up with some of these things, man. And I even watching other games that Kansas played in that year, really not even that year, but any year under Nicky, they ran some stuff that would make you scratch your head and leave really good defenses looking stupid. Like the creativity in his play calling is amazing. So the fact that Zabrowski's there, because I actually wasn't sure who the OC was now, so I'm glad you cleared that up for me. The fact that he's there, you know, little bit nerve wracking because that's something that West Virginia fans and one of the West Virginia team probably ought to be on the lookout for. Hopefully, Ali will have his guys prepared for any of that stuff, but I don't know how you prepare for something that exotic. But up front, what's Kansas West Virginia's strength right now is their defense by far. They are top 2 in the country in sacks right now. Again, 3 games in, I get it, but they're top 2 in the country in sacks. They're doing really good in third down defense. They're tied for 14th in forced turnovers. They're having a pretty strong year in that regard. Their defensive line just got awarded the defensive line of the week in the Big 12 because of their performance against Pitt. They were able to stop that. Pitt only ran for 46 yards against them. How do you think that Kansas O line is looking right now? And will they be able to protect Jalon Daniels, you think?
They actually did a pretty solid job in pass protection against Missouri, despite Missouri having some really good pass rushers. And the other thing is, Jalon Daniels does a tremendous job of making those guys right because of how elusive he is.
Mm-hmm.
You look
Yeah.
at the West Virginia game a year ago, you look at the K-State game a year ago, he was under pressure a lot in both of those games and didn't get sacked a lot in either game
Right.
because of his ability to make guys miss and scramble around. Bryce Foster, the center, was KU's lone preseason All Big 12 guy. He's a little bit different guy than most people have at center, and that he's 6'5", 320 pounds, and
Wow.
is a really high level shot putter on KU's track team too.
Hmm.
And so he's not sort of the mobile, guy that you think about. He's more the guy that can take your defensive tackle and displace them in the running game. Kobe Baines is a transfer from Louisville who's now been in the program for a few years. He's been maybe Kansas's best offensive lineman so far. Calvin Clements, the left tackle, is a local kid. Uh, Played at Lawrence Free State High School and was a guy that originally committed to Baylor before flipping back to KU. They think that he's got potentially some NFL future to him. He learned how the other half lived a little bit against Missouri. Unfortunately, had kind of a tough go there, but there's a lot of potential there. And then their other two linemen, they'll rotate at guard. Amir Herring, who's a transfer from Michigan, is one of the guys at that spot, and Tamake Tuikolobatu, who is a transfer from UCLA, is another guy that works in there. And then at right tackle, it looks like Enrique Cruz has kind of won that battle. He started at Syracuse heading into last year. Syracuse had the coaching change. He didn't play as much after the coaching change. And so he's a guy that's got a lot of college football experience at that right tackle spot. And so they haven't come together just yet. And I think the feeling is, hey, once this group does, there's enough talent, there's enough ability there that they have a chance to be really good on the offensive line. And Lance Leipold's offensive lines have traditionally been pretty good at Kansas, depending on even with different offensive line coaches.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, again, I was looking at their PFF. Well, look, when you look at PFF, that looks like the weakest position on the entire football team.
Yeah,
Uh, would you say that's a fair assessment?
yeah. I think when you look at what happened against Missouri, that's sort of the one measuring stick game that Kansas has, right? And
Yeah.
I think that Kansas couldn't displace those guys that were going to move in the backfield. They weren't reaching their points, and so when that's sort of the one thing you've shown it in a big game standpoint, I think that's absolutely fair at this point.
Okay. Well, I mean, West Virginia's in the same boat. Their offensive line has struggled as well, so uh, it'll be interesting to see which one this game is able to step up and play a little better than the other one because that's we all know games are won in the trenches, right?
Yep, yeah, for sure.
And what do they have? What do the Jayhawks have at receiver this year?
Well, first of all, they've been amazing at
First
tight
of
end.
all, let me ask you. I hope
Yeah,
Luke Grimm's gone. I hope
yes, Luke Grimm is
that guy was there. He was like the Perry Ellis of Kansas football, man. That guy was never. Jeez. But anyway, keep going.
yeah, Luke Grimm was terrific, but he is gone. But Kansas plays a lot of tight ends, and
Yeah.
so those guys they move them around. They do a fantastic job of. It feels like there's always a tight end open. The kind of running joke is that Bowden Drone may lead the Big 12 in just totally wide open catches where nobody is around him. Sean Danica is actually tied, I believe, for the NCAA lead in touchdowns from tight end so far. And so he had a big game against Missouri and showed up well. Carson Brune is more of their blocking guy. He's big tight end from Iowa, like 6'6", 255. He can catch the ball, but they're going to move it and sort of motion those guys all over the place to give you a lot of different looks, and then they're going to use them both in the running and the passing game. And then at receiver, a lot is going to depend on how healthy KU is. They've been really banged up at receiver. Emmanuel Henderson has been. I think Pro Football Focus just put out a thing like the top five Big 12 receivers so far by grade. And Emmanuel Henderson, I think, was at number five. He's an Alabama transfer and has just tremendous deep speed. Like he's the guy that scares defensive coordinators because he can line up and run by whoever is out there. He actually tied Kansas's record for like fastest miles per hour guy that they've had under Leipold. So he's a speedy dude. Cam Pickett had 5 catches for 77 yards in his first half against Fresno State. Injured like his ankle, got banged up, and has only played like 24 snaps over the last few games. Supposedly, he's getting closer to 100%. That would be big for them because he plays kind of that Luke Grimm role. The guy who why is this guy this wide open? We know we have to cover Luke Grimm. Why is he? But why is he in that spot? And so Cam Pickett, if he's healthy, will really help them. Bryson Canty is the guy that they brought in from the Ivy League. Actually, was
Hmm.
injured kind of all camp. Had a good game against Wagner, and is heads the bye week where maybe he could get more snaps now. And then Levi Wentz is an Albany transfer, who's sort of your prototypical like big bodied outside contested catch guy. And he was able to get over the top on Missouri, have like a 50-yard catch in that game, but that's kind of what they have at receiver at this point.
Okay. Interesting. Um, I I got a feeling this is going to be based on what you're saying and what I've seen about West Virginia. I got a feeling this. I think this has a potential to be a somewhat low scoring football game. I know that sounds crazy because of Jalon Daniels and his ability, uh, but I feel like I don't know. I just got a feeling it might be a low scoring game, but because I think West Virginia's defense uh, will have some answers. Supposedly, Jalen's going to get his yards and and some points. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like West Virginia's defensive front might be able to do some things in this game. And their linebackers, and Jamoy Robinson will be playing his first game
Yeah,
as a Mountaineer. We hope that's the expectation anyway. He likely won't play a ton because he's not going to be in shape yet, but If they can just put him in on third down rushing situations, pass rush situations, that would be a plus. It'll be interesting though. It'll be kind of a chess match to watch. To see Zabrowski versus Alley and see who can scheme up the best. Speaking of low scoring games or high scoring games, what were your thoughts when you saw the spread on this game? Right now, before we came on the air, I checked at DraftKings. It was 13.5. Of course, we all know lines are subject to change, but what were your thoughts on that spread? Do you think it's about right, or were you surprised at it when you first saw it?
Dude, I think I said before we got on, too rich for my blood. In
Yeah,
terms of,
yeah.
I think there was this stat floating around that it's the first time Kansas has been favored over a Big 12 team by double digit points in like 15 years. And that's not saying they haven't blown people out or haven't beaten teams by double digit points. But in this case specifically, I would assume that it has a lot to do with, hey, Kansas is battle tested. They're coming off a Missouri game, but they've had a bye to prepare for West Virginia. West Virginia is coming off the emotional high of winning an overtime game
Hmm.
against the rival in Pitt. And Kansas has been tremendous coming off of bye weeks.
Yeah.
Over the last since 2022, Kansas has been 4-0 with
Wow.
3 wins over ranked teams, and the other one was their win over Houston last year. That was like 42-14. So the only
Wow.
time they did beat a ranked team,
They
they've
put up
been really
42 on a Houston team coached by Willie Fritz.
yes.
That's scary.
So they've been really good coming out of bye weeks, and that may be another factor
Great
that they're
point.
kind of tossing in there is, hey, when they've had extra time to prepare. By the way, because of that week zero game, Kansas has 3 bye weeks this year. So, and one's before K State, one before Iowa State. And so I'm not saying KU is going to Arlington, but I am saying KU has bye weeks before some really key games if they were to potentially make a
Yeah.
trip to Arlington this year.
That what you just talked about, them being 4-0 coming off bye week games since you said since 22.
22, yeah.
That's telling to me because that shows you how good Leipold is at getting his guys prepared and using that extra week to his advantage. That to me is probably the answer to along with the other things you mentioned as to why that spread is where it is, and it actually kind of makes more sense now, to be honest with you. Uh, I still think it's a little higher than. I mean, I'm not going to say it's crazy high, but it's higher than I anticipated for sure.
I would
I think
agree.
it's surprisingly high, but after you laid it all out there, uh, makes sense, I guess, to a degree. But anyway, all right, Kevin. Any last words you got for Mountaineer Nation, or for even for Kansas folks who may be watching this? And then also one more time plug your work if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to watch this game because I'm excited to see sort of new look West Virginia under Rich Rod. I think most of us felt like this year West Virginia probably wasn't going to go 10-2 and make the Big 12 title game, but I think you can find out so much from the first year. And last year heading in, you mentioned Willie Fritz. I'm a huge Willie Fritz fan, and I felt like heading into last year if Houston surprises somebody that they just aren't supposed to, that this thing is going to look pretty darn good. And sure enough, they beat K State last year, and so I think I'm looking at similar stuff with with Rich Rod and West Virginia beating Pitt would seem obviously like, hey, this thing. You don't want to say it's ahead of schedule, but certainly it is maybe moving in the right direction. And at the same time, I think Kansas has some high goals this year as well. And you and I talked before we came on here. If Kansas does, top that spread, if Kansas wins this game by 17, 20 points, whatever, I think we're going to have to start looking at this Kansas team as a legitimate contender in the Big 12 this
Yep,
year.
I think that's fair. And I'll tell you what impresses me about Kansas, and I meant to mention this earlier, is the fact that I found this out through Phil Steele, reading Phil Steele and listening to Phil Steele on some podcasts. They had less. Uh, I want to quote this right, and I'm sure you know this already, but they've lost less players to the portal of any Power Four team over the last several years. I forget it's 3 years or 4 years. I can't remember the exact number, but Lance Leipold has the ability. He's built a culture there, and guys are not leaving that football team for whatever reason. Maybe it's NIL. I don't think it's all NIL money. I'm sure that's a piece of it, but especially now that we had that big donation, but this was even before that. I mean, he was keeping
Yeah.
guys on that team, and I think that speaks volumes to the culture they've built there. I mean, look at Jalon Daniels. You know, he could have tried his hand at the draft, but he decided to come back. Uh, so I think that speaks volumes. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think they do a great job of caring for players, and I think maybe even beyond what every coach says that they do, they take legitimate interest in players personally as well as what they can do on the football field. But I think the biggest thing, and I think you'd hear this from players, I think you'd hear this from staff, and I think you'd hear this from parents. They communicate incredibly well and they're really honest. And so they don't have a single player in that entire football program, I don't think, who is surprised by his placement because they tell him, hey, you want to be the number one running back. Here is why you're the number three running back. Here's what you need to do to become the number two running back. Here's what you need to do to become the number one running back. And so I think the level of communication and the level of honesty that they have with all those guys is really a tremendous deal. And honestly, most of the guys that they've lost to the portal have been for big NIL or hey, this guy is going to jump up and go to this place. Gage Keys, who I mentioned earlier in that defensive tackle group, who's been banged up and hasn't played this year, was a guy that KU got transferred out to go to Auburn and play SEC football. Was at Auburn for a year and came back and was basically like the grass was not greener on the
Yeah.
other side. And obviously, you get boomerang transfers like that. You're probably doing something fairly right.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Interesting. I just found, do you remember what the time frame was? Was it 2 years, 3 years that they've had the least amount of transfers? Do you remember
I don't know
what
what
that
the
number?
time period is, but it's amazing like how few of those guys they wind up
Yeah.
losing, and the guys that they do lose, the number of times they lose somebody who is projected as a major contributor is very small.
Right. And even though, like for example, I think I read they have like 10 starters coming back from last year's team, but the guys who will be replacing them have been on the team already for a couple of years for the most part. They're familiar with the culture. They're familiar with how Coach Leipold does things. Now, be familiar with the schemes. I mean, it's not like they haven't played at all, and it's not like they haven't been familiarized with it. It's not like bringing in a bunch of transfers who don't have a clue, right? They're guys who have been in the system already for 2 to 3 years. And I think that speaks volumes because you just don't see that much anymore. I mean, Clemson's trying to do it that way. Uh, Success there has been mixed, I guess, depending on who you ask. I mean, Clemson's got, their expectations are national championship or bust, right? That's probably a little different than what Kansas and West Virginia fans expect. Um, but I just admire what Leipold's done there. I mean, I think it's admirable. I think, to me, he's one of the best coaches in college football. I don't know how you can't say he is when you look at where Kansas was when he took it over to where they are today.
Sure.
I think it's pretty remarkable, to be honest with you. Uh, and I think most coaches, I know Coach Brown used to constantly compliment, when he was at Western, he was always complimenting Coach Leipold and how good of a coach he was. But anyway, for the reminder for those of you who are listening, this has been a conversation with Kevin Flaherty from KCSN, the Kansas City Sports Network, who covers the Kansas Jayhawks. You can find him on the Verbal Commitment Pod. You can also find him as a contributor over at the 365 Sports newsletter at 365sports.video. And he also has another podcast he does over at KCSN called the Pay Heed Pod, Payheed. Check him out on any of those platforms. You can check him out on X at K Flaherty, KCSN as well. Appreciate it. You tuning in to the show. If you're listening on podcast, please follow us. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously the like button helps. Subscribe to the channel, please, and share it with your family, friends. Let them know about us. Shout out to our sponsors, 360 DraftKings. I almost said 365 Sports. DraftKings and then Appalachia Digital. You see their logo in the corner. The folks who design our website over at wvsportschat.com. They can also design your site for you or level up your current site. So go check them out. AppalachiaDigital.com/Couz. Thanks again to Kevin for coming on the show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope the rest of your day's top shelf and Q Country Roads.